Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another video interview for Africa Oil and Power. Today we have with us Mr. Simo Kubheka, who is from Avuke Group. We will be discussing COVID-19 and risk and compliance and more about Avuke Group itself. So, Mr. Simo Kubheka, thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah.
Pleasure. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you, Charlie.
Great, so we're just going to start. So please could you provide a brief overview of Avuke Group, including company history, service offerings, clients, and target market?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think, it's one of the things I get quite excited about. We decided, and this has been a journey for me in terms of 20 years, both from experience and in terms of objectives. So Avuke itself, we perceive ourselves very much as being an international company with an emphasis and focus on Africa. We are fortunate enough that we have a multidisciplinary team. When we initiate operations, probably in about specifically focus into Africa and also into Europe was, I would say, a good 36 months, 12 to 18 months ago in the main. But as a business and as a concept, I think it's fairly new, and we've obviously gone out in terms of offering what is a business-focused opportunity for businesses in terms of from a compliance perspective. So we tend to put compliance, rather than putting compliance as a business model, but actually making businesses compliant. And I think this feeds very well into our ethos, which is we consider ourselves as business ethical warriors, but also kind of very much focusing on helping business and enable themselves to have sustainable growth and to be able to work in what is a very changing landscape, both from a regulation perspective, and COVID is just one of many examples. But we are not necessarily your typical, we don't consider ourselves being a law firm. We are management consultancy in legal risk and compliance. And our emphasis is really just to help businesses drive the trajectory of growth, and I think that's a great story. We are a team of both lawyers, multidisciplinary, as well as compliance, finance, and audit and business. So we have a geologist as well in a group as well. So I think that's one of the great things and the great stories for us. But we are agnostic in terms of key industries per se, although our strength lies in mining and technology and human capital. That's one of the key things for us. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah. What have your key developments been in the past 12 months?
Well, I think it's an interesting one because there's a lot of things. I would say for me personally, is really when we seeking to establish ourselves in both in Angola and in South Africa and in Italy. We are mainly UK-based operations but with an international arm, but actually being able to talk to both clients and people and businesses from a local perspective, that's quite exciting for us. So I say as an internal evolution, that's probably one of the key things. The other great story, which I think is being able to help companies go through quite a lot of excessive change, whether it is because of from a data privacy, cybersecurity, fiscal changes. But I think there's probably two great stories. One business which was really looking to grow and finding challenging and regulatory change in Europe, and then also helping businesses in Southern Africa to downscale and helping them go through the challenge, and mainly the manufacturing space. But this is kind of a great story for us because it was an enabler for a challenge, but also an opportunity. So I think that's one of the positive things for us.
Great. And how has COVID-19 impacted the way in which companies are approaching compliance and risk management?
It's an interesting one because I think it's obviously very difficult to fully assess the impact of COVID, because I think we're living in the moment still where we're realizing the fear factor, as I call it. I think we are actually going through the challenge of the unknown, and that often not is a greater harm, if anything, because it leads to inertia. So I think the full effect of COVID is yet to be fully realized. But having said that, we have already perceived how many companies have gone to a position where either they have to completely restructure, change, shift their verticals, or literally downsize because they weren't prepared. And comparably, some other companies and some that I've worked with very closely have done very well in order to grow, because they've had the right ability in terms of flexible workforce, the right ability in terms of being able to really capitalize on the demands, because they were nimble enough, or because they really had a key point, which was COVID proof, as one would argue. But from a regulatory perspective, I think the big thing really is looking at technological landscape across sectors.
And from a compliance perspective, what are the commercial and structural hurdles hindering investment and expansion of businesses throughout the continent?
The reality is that we'll see is, of course, we'll have a huge economical downturn. And I think that economical downturn will result on, I think, probably more reluctance of high risk profile business opportunities. And from a regional perspective, Africa has historically unfairly been regarded as a high risk region. And with a global downturn, it is most likely that that will be even more questionable. And I think, therefore, what we will see is that there's more reluctance, so to speak. But at the same time, I think that's where, from our perspective, Avuke comes in, because we believe a lot of it is we need to change that perception. And it's a brand item. And I talk a lot about the brand nature of Africa and businesses in Africa, and saying that we need to shift the approach, the way we look at it, because in the main, Africa has a huge, and I think growing, youth and young population. And that's a huge asset. That means it has access to kind of the key, what I would say, commodity, which is time. Right? They are the custodians, and I would see them as a significant investment board from that perspective, right? Because they have the biggest commodity and important commodity, which is time, because they're young. And I think that's a critical aspect. From a risk perspective and a reluctance perspective, which I think is a big one, is the fact that we need to be able to show visible compliance. Our objective and goals is to help businesses being able to do so, because that is where you change the perception. And often perception is a reality, because it's how people perceive. And I think, therefore, we are looking to help that, to alleviate businesses that have got a good idea, and helping them convert that good idea into sustainable business model from a regulation perspective. And that will drive a lot of more investment and confidence in the market and in the region per se. And that's one of our key focal points. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So how do you feel that current tax, legal and regulatory frameworks can be improved to attract greater investment?
I wish I had more time.
Quite a broad question.
I've been blessed enough to be able to work in a very international landscape, both in my previous lives and with firms, and where I am today. The biggest challenge, I would say, is cohesion. And I think when you talk about fiscal and regulatory cohesion, there are good examples and there are bad examples. I think the challenge for Africa is that it has a very diverse, just like its people. And I think that's a great story, but it also makes it difficult for investors. It also makes it difficult for businesses and how they can expand into the region, because they need to navigate around a very multi-complex and at times archaic legal frameworks, because they're driven from historical reasons. And the cohesion is critical. And I think good examples were what I call regions, and using the EU, which is close to where I am today and right now. The cohesiveness of the regulations, and especially fiscal, has led to more comfort levels into the region. And because there was more what is called trading in between nations, and it became kind of accelerated through EU, that enabled that. So there was much more conversations and dialogue and cohesion between nations in Europe through the tax inspector. So the public sector drove that, but the business, more than anything, was the main fuel, was the main reason. And I think where Africa needs to get to is much more of that kind of cohesion, and looking what is best for Africa, as opposed to what are the kind of colonial concepts, ideas, legislation that we carry with us, without actually looking from an internal perspective, from a region perspective. And I think that's a big thing. And hopefully what we'll see with this it's unusual, but I'll talk about COVID and the global downturn for me, which is a mixed blessing. It's a blessing in any regards because it will force more independence between nations, between businesses across regions, and therefore should force more cohesion, both from a fiscal and regulatory perspective. And I think that is, to me, is very, very critical if it makes sense. I think we hopefully we can see more of that, but that needs to be addressed, because then you can have transparency, clarity, and consistency, but also businesses can adhere, know how to adhere, and the ease to do business becomes a lot better, and that will drive further investment. I think this is quite critical.
And in your opinion, which is the most important resource for the continent, and how do you believe that Avuke Group can support this?
You know, I mentioned, and I often go through this, and we talked a little. I mentioned investment and an investment board, and I was trying to go back to is the people. I regard and I see that the biggest resource that Africa has are the people. And it's a continent. It's a young continent. It's a growing continent, and therefore, it has got that ability to scale. It has got the ability for new thought. What it requires is not necessarily, and I'm not suggesting that it doesn't need financial investments and monetary, and they are important. But what it needs more is to harness that talent through technical and innovation. And there's a lot of examples of it, whether they take microfinance, whether they take other forms of energy that can be harnessed because of the opportunity. But it's the people that are going to drive it. Africa has got, in terms of solar radiation, probably uniquely is one of the highest in the world. You have huge opportunities in wind farming. Again, you have all these aspects of what we call natural resources, but ultimately the driver for the other people. And that's where the investment needs to be made. So for me, that is a key differentiator, and that is the greatest asset that Africa has.
Great. And in the wake of market volatility, what measures can be taken to mitigate project risk and build back investor confidence?
The amount of times that I have conversations with the C-suite board members in terms of both in private and public sector, often the conversation with regards to the region and is about the non-compliance, the challenges, the non-regulations, the conflict. All these things drive these perceptions. And I think the critical aspect is Africa needs to be able to demonstrate more visibly compliance. Right? It's an easy thing to say. I can say it, you can say it, everybody talks about compliance. It's compliance, this is compliance, that. It's a lot harder to do. It's a lot harder to make it an actual differentiator. We see compliance challenges and regulatory challenges as actually a differentiator, but also a significant opportunity. And helping businesses being able to demonstrate that will drive greater market confidence. There are a lot of business opportunities and changes, and I'm having great conversations with my colleagues when based in Angola. We talk about this. It's such a huge opportunity. But the challenge is that perception. And we want to help business being able to demonstrate that, because it will drive the link, which is, let's talk about, when we talk about the investors, I think for me, it's not about investors, it's about businesses. It's about the interaction between two demands, two opportunities, two interests. How you can connect those is only dependent on being able to give comfort. When they're comfortable, And that is, to me, so important, because that's what makes the difference between, and I try to use that, whether it's a product, whether it be example, I would say, let's say a diamond. A diamond in itself is a diamond. But where the diamond is extrapolated from, where it has a difference in terms of the perception of the brand associated where the resource is taken from. Hence why a lot of times this is the biggest challenge for Africa. It becomes more costly because it's the risk associated. Extrapolating concerns. The refinement becomes a question because do you have the capabilities? These are all perceptions because it's all human beings. They're all the same. But it's simply because where the geolocation has a difference. The brand, therefore, is where the geolocation is, and that needs to be changed. So for us, it's driving, proving and demonstrating compliance and ability to achieve that, and that businesses locally can achieve that with the right level of support.
And lastly, what message do you have for businesses looking to enter into or expand into new and existing markets in Africa?
I think the big thing for me is, I would say for investors, is that there's such amazing stories in terms of where people are thinking differently. Whether you take it in the finance sector, whether you take it in engineering, whether you take it, there's so many things that are coming from the continent. And I think when I look at oil and I look at gas, I look at energy, and I look at renewable energy, these are all fantastic things that are accessible. But this is also the reason why I would say it's so important, is because Africa is going to go through significant change through innovation, forced innovation. Right? As oil prices make it more difficult, it means that renewable energies and how to harness renewable energy becomes more important. And the thought process, if we're able to realize and overcome these misconceptions, and what we're hoping to achieve is demonstrate that actually this is a good time. It's a good time for change. The way COVID has forced families to be more closer together has driven behaviors. I'm currently in the UK, and suddenly you see a lot of people running around. They are using the opportunities of being outdoors when they can, getting pets. I have 2 dogs. So I think that's a big one. It's going to drive change and opportunity. And Africa is going to be a location where, yes, it's going to feel the challenges of an economical downturn, a global economic downturn, but it's also going to drive change and innovation. And our job is to demonstrate and show through compliance and regulation controls that actually it is a sustainable investment to be made.